Hello there, my name is Will and welcome along to another What's That Groove, where today I'm breaking down the classic Paramore song, That's What You Get. And in particular, I'm going to be focusing on the two variations of the groove that Zach Farrell plays in the first verse of the song. So that's this one, and this one. Let's get involved and see how we go about counting this thing. So within this song, we actually have two different time signatures being used. The chorus of the song is being played in what's known as 4/4 time. However, the riff and the verse is being played in what's called 3/4 time. Now, when you count in 4/4 time, this basically means you count 4 quarter notes and then reset your count. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. However, when you play in 3/4, you reset your count early, and when you get to 3, that's when you start counting again. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. And this creates a different feeling and a different rhythm to the song. Both of the variations that we're looking at today are being counted in that 3/4 time. And we're going to look at our first variation now. So we're going to be counting in 8th notes, which first of all doesn't really make much sense as a name anymore, because 8th notes are when you play 2 hits per beat evenly. So when we play 4/4 time, that's 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Works great because you have 8 notes. However, when you play 3/4 time, that means we have 1 and 2 and 3 and. Only 6 notes. So you play 6 8th notes. Either way, we're going to be counting 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and on our hi-hat, and we're going to play all of those hi-hat hits with our right hand. And for that first variation, we're going to be putting the bass drum on 1 with the right hand, and the snare drum is going to land on 3 with our left hand at the same time as our right. Should sound something nice and slowly like this. Now, if this is the first time you've played in 3/4, you might need to do that quite a few times, but once you've got that, it's time to add in more bass drums. So for our first variation, as well as the bass drum we already have on 1, we're going to be adding in 2 more bass drums. And the first of those 2 bass drums is going to land between the and of 1 and 2. So it's a 16th note. Don't even get me started. A 16th note landing between those 2 notes. So we have 1 and a 2. Bass, hat, bass, hat. The next bass drum then lands on the and of 2. So this one's going to be with the hi-hat. So the last one was in between it. This one is at the same time. So we're going to have 1 and a 2 and. That's where our bass drum is. Bass, hat, bass, hat together there. Now you have to be careful here, because when the bass drum lands in between those hi-hats, you might have a bit of a pull to put the hi-hat with the bass drum and have something like. So you have to really work on getting that nice even gap between the bass drum and the hi-hat. Once you have that though, all you have to do is put the snare drum on 3 and the remaining hi-hat on its own on the and of 3. So you're going to play that 8 times in a row, so 8 bars in all for your first variation of the beat. However, on the 4th bar, there is a little bit of cheeky magic that goes down on the snare drum. Instead of playing the backbeat on 3, 1 and a 2 and 3, he actually brings his right hand down and plays 2 16th notes, 3 E, and then the right hand goes back to the hi-hat just as normal for the and of 3, 3 E and. So all together you get. So that happens on the fourth one, followed by a crash. Altogether, the first 8 bars of your first verse should sound like this. So once you've played those 8 bars, you return to your riff for your big crashes and your big snare drum fill before going back to the same phrase but a different variation on how you play the groove. But fear not, we're going to do exactly the same thing as we did with our first variation, and we're going to break it down step by step. The first difference that we have from the first variation to this one is that it's a 2-bar phrase. The snare drum is going to move. So rather than the snare drum always landing on 3, the first bar, the snare drum is actually going to land on 2. So just the first bar, we've got 1 and 2 and 3 and we've got a snare on 2, and we'll have a bass drum on 1. So to begin with, just this. And now for the second bar, we're going to take that bass drum out for a moment, and we're actually going to have 2 snares in our second bar. The first snare lands on 1, which is where the bass drum was, and the second snare is going to land on 3. So now I have snare and 2 and snare and. This is just for our second bar. If you then play the bars back to back, you get this. This is where we get some 3-4-4-4 magic jiggery pokery crossover. Suddenly, we've almost got a bit of a 4-4 kind of groove, what feels like a 4-4 groove on our hands. And this is because if you take the bass drum out and just listen to the hands, your hands are playing what's typical of a 4-4 groove, but the snare almost feels like it's on a 2 and 4 kind of thing. Now this is great because it gives the song this kind of drive, this second half drive to the verse, which makes it almost feel quite almost march-like underneath what's going on and really pushes the song through. However, when you're learning to play the drum beat, it can be very distracting. We're so used to playing so many 4-4 grooves on the drums, so you have to be careful that you're not getting too confused with the 4-4-ness of our 3-4 groove. Okay, once we've got that, it's time to add in some more bass drums. So I'm going to take the 2-bar phrase and split it in 2. Take the second bar and put that on the shelf, and we're going to zoom in and have a look at our first bar. Now the extra bass drums that we're going to be adding in here are actually really similar to what we did in the first part of the verse. So we've got a bass drum again on the of 1 and on the and of 2. However, remember that the snare drum has moved now, so it's not landing on 3, it's landing on 2. And we're actually going to put a bass drum on 3 instead. So really slowly, we're going to get something like this. We're going to have 1 and a 2 and 3 and. Bass, hat, bass, snare, bass, bass, hat. So I'm going to take that first bar, put it on the side, leave it to simmer at about gas mark 3. We'll be back for that in just a second. Return to our shelf and look at the second bar. Remember, in the second bar, the snare drums are landing on 1 and 3. So that was... And here, actually, we have some very similar bass drum placements. So we've got a bass drum landing on the of 1. So to begin with, we have... And then there's another bass drum, again on the and of 2. And then we just have our snare drum landing on 3 and our right hand on the hi-hat on the and of 3. So altogether, for that second bar, you have this phrase. What's interesting here is that you're actually playing the exact same rhythm as you do in the first bar. We've just changed the orchestration, so the rhythm is being played in a different way between the bass and the snare drum. So if I play them side by side between a gap, you can hear how it's the same thing, just played in a slightly different way. So the first bar, quickly just turn that down, stop that from bubbling over. And then the second bar. It's almost like a call and response. And of course in the song they're played side by side with no gap. So the full phrase should sound like this. And you're going to play that phrase 4 times in a row in total, which is the same as 8 bars. So I'll play it for you now. 4 of those phrases in a row, roughly to the speed of the song, should sound something like this. Of course, what's also great is that is the same beat that Zach Farrell plays in the second verse of the song as well. Hopefully now you have your 2 variations that you can bring together to play the verse in full. And I'm going to demo the verse for you in full right now. Remember that in the song we actually go to the riff in between the 2 variations, and I'm going to include that in the demo I'm about to show you now. Should sound something like this. Get in there. Such a good fun song to play, and I hope from watching today's lesson you've got a better idea of how to play the verses in That's What You Get. If you could go ahead and press the like button on this video, that would be amazing. And why not, if you could, subscribe to the channel to see more drum lessons just like this one. I'd love to know actually in the comments below. If you could put in a comment, let me know what other songs would you like to see me break down and work out for you and teach you how to play. Until next time, my name's Will, and I'll see you again soon.